Hey, you, Nina here. You are officially listening to Triggered Can We Play With That wherever you get your podcasts. You might also be watching us on YouTube. Hey, and if you are not following me on Instagram at Drama Therapist Nina, now is a really great time to do that. So, this is actually episode 2 in a 3-part series that we are doing this month on powered to empowered. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And the acronym that we use is TRA. If you listened last episode, you might have heard me say TRA, right? It's our fun way of playing with TRA, which is transparency, responsibility, and accountability. So if you are listening in for the first time, welcome. We aim to explore triggers, triggering space, triggering material, moments that have triggers, all things around triggers, right? We aim to explore these spaces so that we can transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Yes. So, how are we going to do that? My invitation is that you grab a journal or a really good friend to dialogue with about what inevitably comes up for you in this episode. These episodes are not designed to trigger you. They are designed to explore the material around this. Yes, you're human, I'm human too. And I want us to learn these skills. So, in this episode, just like I said, it is part 2 in the 3-part series. We're exploring triggers around responsibility. Okay. Let me tell you in a nutshell why responsibility is so triggering for people. Okay. Already get your journals out, you all. We're jumping ahead. Okay. Responsibility is so triggering for people when they are struggling with a powered dynamic. Okay. If you are not familiar with the difference between powered and empowered dynamics, here it is in a nutshell. A powered dynamic, my friend, says that somebody is going to be right and somebody is going to be wrong. Every power dynamic works this way. And if you don't believe what the person who thinks they're right is, then you are going to be seen as wrong. Okay. Flip the script on this. In an empowered dynamic, we see the choices that people make as choices, not as necessarily a right or wrong choice, but as a choice that nonetheless had a consequence. Sometimes the consequences are what we intend. Sometimes the consequences have a different impact than what we intend. So, if you are already excited thinking about the difference between powered to empowered, if you're already like, she's speaking my language, talking about moving from yes, powered to empowered, but also taking responsibility, we are going to be exploring how responsibility looks in a powered dynamic and how different responsibility looks when you come at it from an empowered dynamic. Okay. So, again, go get your journals. We are not going to be able to explore every facet, but oh, my friends, we are going to be able to explore at least one, right? Trying to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. So, that is all I've got for you right here at the beginning. Grab your journals, listen in, because of course, I am so, so curious. Are you ready to play?
Welcome to Triggered. Can we play with that? You know that moment when your emotions ramp up in an instant, leaving you feeling helpless, frozen, or out of control? In that moment, you've been emotionally hijacked, the very definition of triggered. And I want to ask you, can we play with that? I'm Nina L. Garcia, drama therapist and empowerment coach of Houston Creative Arts Therapy. Join me as we discover ways to empower you and the people who mean the most to you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Triggered. Real playful, real respectful, real empowered.
Let's take a breath. And let's move forward with our story time. We always start with a story, right? Maybe it's a personal anecdote, maybe it's a public story, maybe it's something we have completely fantasticized for you so that we can play with, right, a surreal reality. In today's case, we are taking a very real story. It was very big in the news. We're taking a public clip of it from Good Morning America on YouTube. You can find it in the show notes, the link to the exact episode that we're going to be looking at on YouTube. And you are going to hear that clip shortly so that you understand what we are referencing with in regard, right, to responsibility today. And before we go into that, I want to review with you transparency, just in case you did not listen into the previous episode. So, in a nutshell, when we're looking at transparency, we're saying, I can be honest about the things that have happened in this moment. Here is objectively what has occurred. So, I give a different story and episode in the previous one. But in today's episode of Triggered, Can We Play With That? As we explore responsibility, we are looking at the Will Smith versus Chris Rock moment. If you're not familiar with it, again, I'm going to play a little clip. It will catch you up on the story very briefly, right? Without a lot of context, but I promise you will be able to follow along. And when we think about this moment, transparency is just being able to say objectively, in a nutshell, when we're thinking about transparency, here's what we have. Transparently, Chris Rock made a joke at Jada Pinkett Smith's expense. Will Smith got up, slapped Chris Rock in the face. These are the things that objectively, transparently occurred without any context around them, without any talk about the feelings about this. This is objectively what occurred. This is us being transparent when we say, I had a problem with this because somebody got hit in the face, or I had a problem with this because somebody made a joke at someone else's expense. That's the transparent part of this series, okay? What we are going to be focusing on again in today's episode is the responsibility portion. Just because we are transparent about what happens does not mean that we then take responsibility. And so let's listen into this little clip. I'll share my screen for those of you who are on YouTube, and we are going to move from there.
Surprise there necessarily, but they're talking about the same incident. What's different here is that Will Smith, we're hearing his voice and seeing him for the first time in this apology. Yes, he sits down on camera and answers questions, but this was no interview.
I'm human, and I made a mistake.
Will Smith once again apologizing, but this time and for the first time on camera for that now infamous slap.
I've reached out to Chris, and the message that came back is that he's not ready to talk. Chris, I apologize to you. My behavior was unacceptable, and I'm here whenever you're ready to talk.
So I'm going to pause it there. And hopefully you got the gist of what exactly or thereabouts might have been going on. And here is what I want us to explore. First off, I said it before in the intro, but I'm going to say it again. Y'all get those journals out because here we go. The first thing, lesson-wise, that I want us to be exploring in this is we already talked about transparently, what occurred. The next step is responsibility. Here is what we mean by responsibility. When we take responsibility, we are taking responsibility only for ourselves, for our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. You cannot take responsibility for someone else in the way that we are going to describe this just for today's context, okay? There's so many different examples of this, but in this episode, I really want you to think about responsibility is just about what you can control. Control what you can control. And the only things that you can control are your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. There is no one else available to take responsibility for the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that we have. No one else can do that. And here's what I will hear. Yeah, but Nina, what if I have children? What if I'm legally responsible? If somebody else told you you were responsible for somebody else, think about what they're saying. I repeat, in the case of how we are talking about really doing yourself justice, no one else is available to take responsibility for your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So when I say responsibility is the next step in the Power to Empower TRA process, it is your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I mentioned earlier about responsibility in a powered dynamic. In powered and oppressive spaces, responsibility is something that is often not taken because it means that if my choice hurt someone else, if it minimized someone else, if it misrepresented them, or if it outright rejected another individual, right? If it oppressed them, in other words, then I don't want to take responsibility for that, because that means in a power dynamic that I was the one who was wrong, and I don't think I was wrong. You picking up what I'm putting down? In an empowered dynamic, we're not seeking to find who was right and who was wrong. What we say and acknowledge is there are multiple parties in this, and people made choices, and it is possible that the intent of those choices did not match the impact. And we're not going to say, oh, the intent didn't match the impact, you're off the hook. In an empowered world, we say, your intent did not match your impact, and now we'd like you to hold yourself responsible for the choices that you made. This is the next step in the TRA process, okay? Powered to empowered, transparency first, responsibility second. This is not rocket science, but when I tell you that this is one of the most triggering things for people, I know you don't even need me to say that because you know it. How often have you passed off responsibility, said you didn't want it, put it on someone else? Here is the next big piece that I am going to offer to you folks. Bullet point number 3. When we blame our internal experience on someone else, we do ourselves a disservice and an injustice. What I mean by this is, if in the video we had Will, who had decided, you know what? It was because of what Chris said. That's why I hit him. That's why it was Chris's fault that he got hit. That is not a responsible statement. It's not Chris's fault that he got hit. Will made a choice to hit him. Now, Will made it with the intent and the idea that Will might have had. We're not going to put words into that space, right? And Chris made the joke with a different intent, right? We're not going to put words into that space, but I can tell you right now, what the world knows is the intent on both of these people's parts did not necessarily match the impact. And so, once again, if we blame our internal experience on someone else, we do ourselves a disservice and an injustice. It's like saying I don't have control over my own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And again, that's a loaded statement, folks. I get it. But the core of this episode is to be able to say, when something happens that we say lots of people have a disagreement with, you have a disagreement with, people, even 2 people have a disagreement with, it doesn't matter how many people are involved. When there are 2 parts that disagree or have an altercation or some form of dysfunction between the 2 of them, and we want to move this from a powered way of engaging to an empowered way, we have to be able to be responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So, yes, this episode was short and sweet. We are really trying to get everyone in the community to recognize the difference between powered and empowered engagement. And then how do we shift it when we want to, right? Transparency, responsibility, accountability. So in your journals, here's your recap of this episode. Number 1, responsibility is your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. If there are multiple parties responsible for something that has occurred, it is each party's responsibility for their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Responsibility in a power dynamic, bullet point number 2, always says that there is someone right and there's someone wrong. Responsibility in an empowered dynamic says that there were choices that were made in which the intent did not match the impact, and that we are willing to acknowledge our choices have consequences. We hope that the intent matches the impact, but that is not always the case. And so, control what you can control. Next point, right? Control what you can control, because there is no one else available to take responsibility of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors but you. And where for some people this is going to feel very triggering, very boxed in, it's actually quite liberating when you realize how much power you actually have, how much control you actually have once you start to learn how to utilize it. And of course, the last one, right? When we blame our internal experience on someone else, if you are busy still saying it's somebody else's fault for something, right? And you blame your internal experience on someone else, we do ourselves a disservice and an injustice, because nobody can feel the feelings you're feeling. Nobody can think the things you're thinking or make you behave in a certain way, right? There are things that can prompt it, but that's not what we're talking about, right? That's not what we're talking about. Responsibility, your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, so we can stop casting our experience on other people. Now, for those of you who are like, okay, well, Nina, what happens if somebody did hit me? What happens if somebody is at fault? While you're busy being responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, the next episode is for you, because accountability is what we're focusing on in the final episode of this series. Next week, it will be airing on Wednesday, as usual. Accountability is when you start to involve the system, when you ask somebody else to take responsibility for their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That is you holding the systems of which you are a part of accountable. We will talk more about that in the upcoming episode. For now, we like to give you guys an adventure challenge. So, empowered humans listening out there, here is your adventure challenge for the upcoming week. I want you to think about an altercation, a problem, a dysfunction between you and somebody else where the bridge broke down. I want you to choose a moment, and I want you to, of course, first be transparent about what the objective problem is. Would everyone have seen if they said objectively? What was the problem? List that down. One sentence. You only get one sentence. Then I want you to think about what is the one thing you can do to empower responsibility, your own responsibility in this case. That is what I want you to write down. I want you to recognize what your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are and how you can start to take responsibility for them. Because one more time, y'all, no one else is available to do that for you. So we want to empower you to do it for you. Yeah? Easier said than done. Of course, if you need support, you reach out to someone who can support you, therapist, life coach, friend, right? Self-help book, whatever it is that helps you explore transforming this hard conversation around taking responsibility, especially if you grew up in a family that did not take responsibility for their actions. You know who I'm talking about, friends. But hopefully you are seeing from the episode and what we've tied in after this, right? The power of taking responsibility for your actions and how helpful that can be when we try to move from empowered to an empowered space. So that is what I planned for you today, folks. Listen into the rest of the series. You've got one more episode to go. And if you're just tuning in now, head back to the first episode on transparency and listen in. All three of these things we are going to be exploring in the Empowered Human Live, which is always the last Wednesday of the month. RSVP, DM me, whatever it is that it takes for you to say, hey, I want access to that. It's a free community meeting for you to meet other people who have an empowered human mindset and they want to talk about this. How do we move from empowered to empowered? How do we, practice the skills of transparency, responsibility, and accountability? And how do we do it in an empowered way, not a powered way, right? So that's what I planned for you today, folks. Thank you so much for listening in and being willing to get curious and explore your triggers as a human being. Of course, if this was helpful, share the episode. Let's get the dialogue going. And I certainly hope to see you at the Empowered Human Live at the end of the month so that we can really get the dialogue going and build this empowered human community. Thank you so much. And of course, stay curious.